to paraphrase Norm Macdonald, evangelicals love doing rituals. There's so many things in here that we would normally call rituals.
Like what? Because I would say everybody loves doing rituals.
Yeah, but we don't think of evangelicals as being doing, like, the traditional take is like, Catholics are ritual people, Protestants are belief people.
Okay. Is that the...
Yeah.
Okay. No, keep going. Welcome to Cult Favorite, the podcast that will go to camp, but only if there are s'mores. I'm Merinda Simmons. I'm speaking only for myself. I don't know what your camp like.
No, I like s'mores.
Wills, won't.
I go to camp.
Cans.
I was my favorite thing about summer camp was the blob. So it was on a lake. This camp was on a lake.
Yeah.
And the blob is this giant inflatable like thing. Did you ever see the movie Heavyweights?
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it has the blob. I love the blob.
I've seen Goonies.
You jump off the
That's
tower.
More
so you sit on the edge of the blob. Someone else is on a tower. They jump onto the blob and it catapults you into the lake.
You know, my favorite thing about summer camp was?
What?
Never being in summer camp.
You never went to summer camp?
I'm not. I don't know. If there had been if my parents had found like a camp for like introvert weirdos. I mean, I know
Those
they exist.
Yeah.
Totally, 100% they exist. But that was definitely not
my parents had found a camp for introverts.
Yeah, I mean, if I had found that, then maybe I would have been a camp person. As it is, I'm not a camp fan, but I am a fan of s'mores. So
I was at Power Time camp. It was the
Power Time?
Denominational church camp. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm Merinda Simmons, and I like s'mores. What's your name?
I'm Mike
Who am I
Altman.
talking to today?
I am Mike Altman. We are two religious studies professors trying to understand all these cult documentaries you can't stop binge watching. This one is not really a binge watchy streaming show. It's a classic. We're doing continuing our summer classic.
I'm into our summer theme.
Our summer theme.
I feel like I should like show up with like sunglasses, maybe a beach hat, some swimmies. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something. A s'more. Except
we
it would
could
be
just
messy.
build a fire in my office. I'm sure that'll go over great.
But
we're talking about Jesus Camp, the 2006 documentary. Was nominated for an Academy Award.
Yes, it was. Did you dig into that?
Because I saw that it got beaten out
by what?
By Inconvenient Truth.
Oh, interesting.
Which I thought was a statement that they're right. They are under attack.
Al Gore's
clearly.
Documentary about global warming.
Yeah, so clearly if Al Gore's liberal propaganda is ousting Jesus Camp, then they're right to feel like they're losing their country. I
did not have the time to like go into the rabbit hole of like what made this documentary a particular standout.
Oh, I have
you have thoughts?
I have so many thoughts on that part.
Great, because
that's why I didn't watch the documentary forever.
I have thoughts, but I would be more interested in your thoughts than my own on that front. So what did you know before about Jesus Camp?
The documentary, like this was on my radar as soon as it came out, and but I avoided it for a few different reasons. I knew it existed, and it was about a Pentecostal kids camp.
Mm-hmm.
It was the George W. Bush scene that we'll get to at some point. The cutout scene was sort of all something.
They have a cardboard cutout.
Yeah,
that
was a thing I had heard about, but I kind of avoided it. And when it came out in 2006. It came out right as I was starting grad school, actually. It just had this like George W. Bush era, Michael Moore liberal vibe attached to it that I was so sick of at that point. That kind of like self-satisfied, like liberal snark of that particular moment.
It was made by Rachel Grady and Heidi Ewing.
Yes. But I think what happened, this was on the Wikipedia pages, is it got picked up by a different distributor and was at Michael Moore's like film festival or whatever. And kind of got attached to him.
So like really specifically Michael Moore.
Yeah, like it got attached to him in that kind of like post, was it Fahrenheit 9/11 kind of moment. And so I think it's funny, like the original distributors got it pulled from that festival because of that they didn't want that connection.
Mm-hmm.
But that literally was the kind of connection that made me like roll my eyes at
And the
it.
snark energy, like
Yeah,
that
just
is
the
associated
liberals
with him is
pointing
kind of,
at
right.
evangelicals
Anybody,
and getting
yeah.
scared. I just was like, I don't need
Sure.
this in my life at that time. And so then I never circled back to it because it was,
Right.
20 years ago.
Sure. Okay.
What did you know?
I mean, I know that these camps exist. I don't know.
Much less agonistic relationship.
I mean, I don't know. I guess I just, I don't love, I mean, I understand what you're identifying, the kind of like point and make fun of energy.
Yeah.
But I don't like it when anybody does that to anybody. And I feel like it's very much, kind of the foundation upon which many suburb camps are built in my own head.
It's just
just in general, I don't know. I know that I know that summer camps exist. That's kind of, and I know that there are offshoots and branches of American evangelicalism that are very invested in making sure that the children that the children that they are raising are playing a really specific kind of role in what
that's what came out of this whole we'll get into that.
Yeah.
That's a whole so the film was it sort of filmed in 2005, right around the time it even opens up with this kind of in the time between Sandra Day O'Connor's retirement from the court and then eventually Samuel Alito's confirmation.
That's like the full circle kind of arch. And
it's a really useful, I think, plot device. So what gets covered in the film, it's filmed in 2005 and it's about Becky Fisher, a Pentecostal children's minister who hosts a fundamentalist Pentecostal camp for kids in North Dakota. The documentary follows 3 children who attend the camp, Rachel, Levi, and Tori.
Levi has the most righteous rat tail I've ever seen in my life. So
no, that was
hat tip to Levi. If you're out there, I fully respect your hairstylings, and I hope that they have only. I just really hope that he's kind of like leaned into and embraced
solid rat tail.
It's so great. Anyway.
Much of the film
and who? Sorry.
And Rachel, Levi, and Tori. Although I think
which one's Tori?
Tori is the dancer. She's in it less than Rachel and Levi. Rachel is incredibly kind of precocious kid, and has lots of things to say. Levi.
Rachel's the one who ministers to others. Like we see her witnessing very directly to strangers that she sees.
Yeah.
Levi is the one who really has like preaching. As an ideal, and so he will kind of do that in front of a crowd. And Tori is the one who really likes Christian heavy metal. Yes. I love her.
Yes, and
her dad is in the army or in the military of some branch of the military, and we get introduced to her because she's listening to metal. It's so great.
Yeah. And I was a little disappointed that they cut out the actual metal she was listening to. I was trying to identify it, but
I wonder if it made an appearance on Hell's Bells. I doubt it. I'm just
kidding.
This is,
IJ
play.
But much of the film is like a variety of sort of worship services and events and camp activities with interviews with Fisher sprinkled in, and then there's this sort of like Mike Papantonio, who was a back when there was an attempt to do like liberal talk radio.
Sure.
That kind of failed, I think. But he had a radio show. What was it called? It was called
Ring of Fire.
Yeah, the radio. I was trying to think of the name of the network that was sort of supposed to be it was the attempt for like it was the attempt for if we had the we would say, where's the progressive Joe Rogan? It was like, where's the progressive Rush
we didn't
Limbaugh?
say that. You said that.
People say that. I don't say that.
Air America. You're talking about Air America.
Is that what it's called? Yeah.
Yes, that's where Rachel Maddow got her start.
That's Al Franken was on there. Yeah.
Anyway.
Anyways, he had a show on there. So there's like,
and he's a Christian.
He's like some form of liberal Protestant Christian,
right? So he's not an outsider critiquing people of faith. He is also a person of faith who disagrees with the way that they understand
right.
their political
Yes,
role.
exactly. And I as I was watching it, he's like the rooster in the Robin Hood movie.
Played by Roger Moore, by the way.
Yeah. So who just sort of steps in.
Miller.
Roger Miller? Roger Moore was James Bond.
Not him. Roger Miller.
Okay. But who sort of steps in and guides us through these different moments and his callers and things. So what actually happens in the documentary, or what doesn't show up in the documentary, we should say first. What doesn't show up is any other form of evangelical Christianity that's not Pentecostalism.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
I mean, I guess that I guess that the radio host like is the voice of that.
But there's also Southern Baptists.
Oh, for 100%. Like
conservative Methodists and all sorts of people who were doing like less intense versions of this.
This is a really specific merger of evangelical Christianity and political,
right? And not even like evangelical. I mean, they showed Ted Haggard at one point. We'll get to, but it's like a very specific strand of charismatic / Pentecostal evangelicalism that does leave out like a lot of other stuff that's happening. However, there are enough, I think, resonances. Like there are things in this film that your average Southern Baptist who voted for George W. Bush, if they were to watch it, would be like, that was weird, but they wouldn't disagree with the overall argument.
Okay.
Right? You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
So like they'd think, why are you saying the Pledge of Allegiance to your Bible? That's kind of weird.
Or praying over like the electrical system.
Right.
Yeah.
But the overall message about taking back our country, et cetera, they'd be like, sure, right?
Okay.
And then, so what happens in the doc? 3 parts. As I watched it, you have like the pre-camp, the camp, and a kind of like post-camp moment. So the opening, and it really is structured around the Sandra Day O'Connor to Alito transition. So the first section of the film, we see the kids before they go off to camp. We get the opening talk radio discussion of O'Connor's retirement, and then we're dropped into Christ's Triumphant Church, which is the main church that shows up in this, for some sort of kids' church pageant, for lack of a better descriptor, a cantata, perhaps, I don't know, but with camouflage face paint and fatigues,
very intense.
Yeah,
lots of yelling,
but also like, what kid wouldn't want to put on? Like, what Missouri Midwestern 9-year-old doesn't want to paint their face and put on fatigues? And I mean, but
it introduces the kind of performance aspects and the theatricality that attends a lot of
all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
We hear
events in this group
from Becky Fisher, and she preaches to the kids. For Fisher, training these kids is important because she claims that, quote, enemies, mostly I think she means Muslims.
Yes. Very specifically,
yes,
she says it.
Are training their kids to be suicide bombers. And I do remember this era of constantly comparing the devotion of Muslims to the lack of devotion or the kind of Jeremiah against evangelical fervor as like, look at the Muslims.
And she's the one who runs the Kids on Fire camp.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we then meet 3 children that the film sort of follows. Levi, we see he's homeschooled and hear about how he's learning about creationism and the myth of global warming. Rachel, who's reading a Jack Chick tract at the bowling alley.
I don't know what that is.
So Jack Chick, one of the most very celebrated as a artist, is a comic. Drew. What
do you draw?
He drew these little tracts that people would hand out, and they'd have these very harsh stories about, like, dying and going. There'd be like the high school couple who got drunk and drove and crash and die and go to hell. And
so a celebrated like illustrator inside of that community.
Well,
or
there
did
are
he do
people
other
within
stuff?
comics world who see his art as being really talented despite the horrible messaging.
Interesting.
There's a whole chapter, Jason Bivens' book on
religion
fear.
Scholar.
He's a religious scholar and friend of mine. But his book called Fear has a whole chapter on Jack Chick tracks.
Say that 3 times fast. Anyway.
Tracks. But it was a whole thing.
Sure.
But also not something you'd want to read at a bowling alley.
I did not pick that up at all. I did not make that.
There's a lot of little. This will be Mike's paying attention to all the Easter eggs.
Sure, 100%. I'm here for it.
We hear from Tori, who likes Christian metal music and dancing, but has to be careful not to dance in the flesh. That's a whole
Be
thing.
tricky.
You can't actually enjoy anything in this world because
Well,
if you enjoy
slippery
it,
slope.
you're not doing it for the right reasons.
Slippery slope.
Then we get to the camp in the next section. There's a Carmen song.
See? Okay, so which one?
It's
These
Who's
are
in the House,
these are like
and the
little
House is
clues
JC.
for you that
One
you're
of my
picking up.
favorite Carmen songs. But yes,
Okay.
Who's in the House, and the House is JC. Go find the music video. It's on YouTube.
I will not.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Will we? Okay.
If I think about it.
Sure.
We hear a lot from Fisher here as she describes how she thinks about the camp, what she's teaching the kids. There's a sermon about how Harry Potter is evil. There are also a variety of scenes.
Not only is Harry Potter evil, but like if it were Old Testament, he would have been stoned or like put to death or whatever.
We don't glorify warlocks.
Yeah. Anyway.
And then what else? She goes on to there's all these scenes of worship meetings where kids are speaking in tongues, praying, crying. One worship meeting, Fisher goes on to Jeremiah about kids who are phonies that are one thing at church and a different thing at school. That sounded really familiar. There's a boy. This is the part that I put this in here because that was like I thought the most heartbreaking moment. This boy who confesses it's hard for him to believe in God, and then breaks into tears. In a later scene, another thing he's reading Josh McDowell apologetics book.
Okay.
So Josh McDowell was the guy who was an atheist who set out to prove that God didn't exist, but lo and behold discovered, oh no, God does exist, and then wrote apologetics books.
I see.
And he has the kids version of kids. I think his book was like Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and this was the kids version. It's the kids that demand a verdict.
There is a lot of harsh public shaming as a blanket message of you think you're like this, but really you're like this. If you're like this, you should examine your heart.
Levi says at one point, like he got saved at 5. And it's like, why? Well, I just knew the world didn't have anything for me.
Listen, I mean, sure.
Like you've absorbed the message, brother. Like I get it. We also see all the part where Becky Fisher is in her sort of closet full of gimmicks for show and tell through her sermons. She's like a fundamentalist carrot top.
You're really reaching into some references today. Okay, sure.
I wrote these notes. I was on it this morning when I wrote the notes.
Okay.
Well, because she's got these little things. She's like constantly pulling out props.
Sure.
She's like a little, she's like, I got Adam and Eve right here, and I've got this brain mold. She's got a mold that makes a Jello brain, and that's like your sticky brain, and you got to think about your impure thoughts sticking to the Jello.
Visuals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, we hear more from the children as they reflect back the teachings that they're hearing. And then the film is well made, I think, in some ways, because there are these moments where they're just like being kids, like wandering around in a cave, like looking at a giant spider. And it's like, while they're also discussing like the eternal souls.
Mm-hmm.
And then after camp, the sort of third section, and this is the part where I had some questions, like, how much of this we're just following these kids around, and how much was like, let's take them here and see what, I don't know. But
yep. Oh, I share those questions.
Yeah, I don't have answers. But they leave for a kind of like tour of American evangelicalism. So they end up we get a scene from the Christ Triumphant Church again, where another woman, not Becky, it's unclear how this is connected to the larger camp question, is asking all of the kids in the church to pray over a cutout of George W. Bush.
And you had heard about that, you said, like as a phenomenon, like a lot of people were doing that?
That was like the defining feature of, like, when I was hearing about the film as a religious studies, graduating religious studies student, or starting grad school, I guess, in 2006. It was
this
like,
thing in this film.
there's this scene where they play over George W. Bush, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. Not as like,
and it was like
cardboard cutouts as a social phenomenon.
No, I mean, I do like, I mean, I had a Michael Jordan at one point, but yeah. No, and I guess it was sort of like, that was the scene that people would keep pointing to as like a look at these scary fundamentalists praying over George W. Bush.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then
interesting.
Yeah. And then there's a anti-abortion sermon given to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
that was also had its own show and tell components. We hear about Alito's nomination, and then Levi travels to Colorado Springs, Colorado, sort of hotbed of American evangelicalism at this moment, to attend Ted Haggard's New Life Church. Haggard jokes with the documentary camera that's on the stage about, like, I know what you did last night. You need to repent. A month after this film came out in 2006, Haggard left his church amid a sex scandal involving a male masseuse and alleged drug use. So that was a pretty ironic moment when I saw that.
That moment was interesting because we never hear the directors or the producers speaking.
Yeah.
But we do get some narrative text sprinkled throughout to help explain things. And that moment explained that church by way of like a statistic saying that Colorado Springs is sort of like a, I don't know, congregating place for what they called Christian tourists.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really interesting label to use, because I can imagine a different context in which tourist would be like, how could you use that word to talk about?
Yes, we wouldn't call
these devout religious
Right.
You know?
We don't call the hundreds of thousands of people who, descend in, Mumbai as tourists.
So
call them devotees or whatever, pilgrims.
So anyway, I thought that there were like some, in the same way that, when you see Levi being homeschooled at the beginning and in his textbook, like the message is a very specifically ideological one, but it is phrased in like, this is a reason people use to say that global warming is real.
Right.
Identify the logical fallacy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In a similar sense, I think that there are always these kind of larger production level overlay pieces of rhetoric and language that we have to keep our brains open to be able to identify, because they are doing similar kinds of work, even if from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Anyway.
And I thought the Haggard scene was interesting too, because I don't think he really, like, Ted Haggard is not, I don't think he came out of that Pentecostal wing of things. I could be wrong, but he, I know he was Methodist.
Google as you keep
I know
talking.
he was Methodist, or maybe it's, but he didn't seem to be like the kids talking about, like Levi's talking about preaching, and he's like, I think he seems kind of like, why is this kid like, he does not come from a tradition where you have kids preaching, and he's sort of like, when you get 30, maybe then you'll have content.
He served as the president of the National Association of Evangelicals from 2003 to 2006.
Yeah, but that's the big tent, like everybody from Billy Graham to, whoever else. But so it was interesting. I think he did not seem to be taking this whole thing very seriously. Then they also visit Washington, D.C. for a kind of anti-abortion demonstration. And then we sort of get the big confrontation at the end between Becky Fisher and Mike Papantonio, where they have this back and forth about indoctrination versus teaching. I don't know.
He invites her on his show.
Yeah, I found the whole thing, I don't know, just kind of like whatever.
Why?
I'm just kind of bored of those confrontations of two people who, like, it just doesn't do it. I don't find it an interesting conversation.
Even when they're two people who share the same, like they're both, I would have found it less interesting if it had been Michael Moore talking to Becky Fisher.
Right.
Right. But
I guess I don't see the point. If you're listening to Mike Papantonio's radio show, you already aren't digging Becky Fisher's thing.
I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think that it is a Christian talking to another Christian about their disagreements regarding political, like what is our role as Christians inside of the public sphere?
Right. And
I mean, in that sense, I'm interested perhaps in why she agreed to go on the show. If she, if he's like,
she's just spreading the truth. Of course she's going to go on the show. More people, someone's going to hear it, and then they're going to get saved. Like,
I wondered a similar thing though about Becky and these families being on this documentary.
Yeah. Oh,
Like
100%.
how, again, like what is the anyway? Like what is the pitch that the directors
pitch is
make?
they think I do think that the argument or the understanding that like anything can plant a seed
We
that
just
the
wanna
Holy
tell your
Spirit can
story.
use.
It's like the Duggars, right?
like the
Where like Jim Bob
Duggars.
says it's his
like,
ministry to
we
be on
haven't-
TV.
Yeah, we haven't done this yet. Maybe we should at some point. But in Margeau, the 1976
yeah.
documentary,
Yeah.
he opens up telling his film crew is going to go around and they're going to document his sermons in these Pentecostal revivals. And he's sort of debriefing this film crew beforehand. And he says, like, everyone's going to, if someone asks you if you know Jesus, just say, yes, I'm going to heaven. How about you? And like, because if not, they're going to try to evangelize you. So everything is a chance to evangelize. And so it's the same thing, I think, here.
Interesting.
I guess, do you remember when, to your question about like why I find it boring, do you remember when Bill Nye was debating the Creation Museum guy?
Sure. But that's
same reason I found that in like
but that's also like
but
that's like, oh, I don't know. I mean, but those are, you know, I am on this side that says this is the truth. You are on this side that says this is the truth. This is what's true. No, it's not. This is what's true. No, it's not. This is what's true. But this is, I think this is, I don't know. I wanted to hear more of that conversation, to be honest, because these are two people who believe in the same God.
I don't think they do. That's why I don't think it's the same
thing. So what
thing.
You're doing though, then, is that thing of, who was it?
What am I doing?
Well, what was the documentary where, in the Duggars, right?
Yeah.
Where the person says this isn't real Christianity.
Yes, I think
so. You're making an authenticity claim about.
I don't think that. I don't think that either of them think the other person is a real Christian. I think we can stand on the outside and be like, you're whatever liberal Protestant so and so, and you're this fundamentalist. We know that both of you historically, or however you want to connect it.
Maybe
I don't think they're actually doing the same thing at all. And I don't think their understanding, like their theological understandings, are so divergent that it's not an internal Christian debate.
I get what you're saying.
That it's the same thing as Bill Nye and Ken Ham.
I get what you're saying. It's interesting because I think I have a different perspective on it, but for the same, but with the same logic the same reason. Like, I think that I'm coming to a different conclusion, but for the same reason of like wanting to respect nuance and specificity and take specificity and nuance really seriously, such that we can identify important distinctions and not collapse all of that variation. But in the process, I think it can be really tempting to identify the right kinds of Christians, quote unquote, and the kooky kind of Christians, quote unquote, I think this film does a little bit by stacking up this point counterpoint of radio show as like voice of even keeled reason and Becky Fisher as prop invested carrot top. Like I think that there's maybe like a I think that can. Anyway, I don't know. That's interesting. I guess I'll have to be thinking about this.
I would like to see the film with less. I don't think we needed the radio host.
Okay.
I guess.
Yeah. I think that was their. I mean, if I'm speculating, I think my read on that was that it was their attempt at trying to not do what I think still ended up kind of happening of making this one very specific subset of charismatic Christianity serve as some sort of like large scale representation of Pentecostalism.
Because if they had and I've often said there are all sorts of people that call themselves Christians that are very different than X or Y or Z. And so I get that desire, that plan or idea. And then so after that we get a little bit of Becky's comments that democracy is the best system in the world, but it will eventually destroy itself because it allows people to choose not to be Christians. I thought that was really prescient. Get the Alito confirmation, and Papatonio is sort of given the last word about the danger he sees fundamentalists and Christian right posing for America. During the final credits, we get my favorite scene of the entire film, because it just sort of sums everything that I think is going on with the kids up.
Mhm.
So Levi and Rachel are doing this like cold evangelizing on the street, which I had to do one time in a park. The most weird thing. Just go up to people and be like, but they do the usual. There's a few different strategies you can do here.
Okay.
One of them is you can do the whole like, can I pray for you? And then you can do the, do you know where you're going to go when you die?
Right.
So they go up to this group of like, appears to be middle-aged black men. And they're
Yes.
like, do you know where you're going to go when they die? And they're like,
Yep.
yeah, heaven. And she's like, are you sure? And
Yep.
they're like, yep. And then they just kind of walk away. And then she just kind of looks at them and goes, I think they were Muslim. And it was just like,
Yep.
her earnestness,
Yeah.
her doing her best to do what is expected of her
Yeah.
was just, in that way that a certain kind of precocious kid does, on top of the only explanation that these people would think that these non-white people,
Yeah.
who's the only black people I think who show up in the entire film,
Right.
is that they have to be Muslim.
And then my favorite actually was the one after that, where she and Levi are then
Yes.
handing out little tracts on the corner. And she says, do you think that anybody thinks that maybe we're just selling something?
Yeah.
Or that I don't know.
Yeah, I
And
think they think we're
Levi-
selling something.
Yeah. And Levi's like, I mean, yeah, probably some of them do. And then she's like, what do we have to sell? We're kids.
She's
Which is such
like,
a
we've got
great-
these flyers, which are the little tracks.
It's but I would love to talk to, maybe one day we can talk to a documentary filmmaker about the roles and responsibilities inherent in documentary filmmaking relative to dealing with children.
Yeah.
And filming children. I'm sure you have to get parental release, permission, whatever. But like, that's tricky, man. Because like these kids, of course, can't consent.
No.
Their parents are doing that for them. And they have, I don't know. I don't know where all of that starts and stops. But also like, it makes sense that kids play a role in documentary, like depending on the story. Like,
and there's still some like,
it's
I didn't have the time to dig
very
into
sticky
it,
to
but
me.
there's still a lot of, especially in 2016, like 10 years after the film, there were a lot of where are these kids now articles. There was there's a Reddit Ask Me Anything with one of the kids from the film. I did find out the blonde.
You didn't read those?
I found them.
Michael. This is
been a rocky
why
start to
it's
the
your
summer. I did find out that the blonde kid in the film is completely left Christianity.
Blonde kid.
The blonde kid who couldn't find God.
Oh,
he got
the guy
out.
who felt really
he left
and
He's
cried.
Not, Levi is still is like a pastorish kind of guy apparently. But
how's his hair? I want the hair to be intact.
The 2016 photo
that's
is
what
not
I would
impressive.
be sad.
No, the 2016.
Okay.
No. Although I mean, maybe it's back. We can only hope.
I mean, anyway. Okay.
So, yeah.
That's the documentary.
What do you want to talk about?
As ever, I am interested in when like cult discourse as such appears and when it does not appear. And like in this case, as we were talking about, you do see shame, like public shaming as a social manipulation tactic. You see an unquestioned authority figure who is able to maneuver the people who are in her charge. But this documentary steers very clear from and really like takes a very wide berth around anything that could be called cult. So in that sense, there's sort of a kind of having it both ways from a production standpoint, whereby on one hand, I think it kind of stacks up like, whoa, these, here's this kooky collective of Christians who are taking things way too far. Right. When I looked up the documentary in the first place, the general descriptions of like what sort of movie it is, eerie was one of the words that came up. So there's that sense of things. But then there is also, though, still this very careful avoidance of anything that would then take that initial claim to where we tend to take it in relation to religion and otherness. So,
I mean, if the people who escaped, in their words, like IBLP in the Duggars documentary, are turning around and calling that a cult.
Yep.
It strikes me that we just didn't have, in 2006 when this film came out, and I actually looked at there's this
former campers or something.
Well, we don't have former campers, but
right.
But if you look at you can use this little Google Ngram tool to see where words, how frequently they appear in published text that they have in and it's all up and to the right for the word cult. Like cults, we've got more cults now than we ever have, but and not actual cults, the word.
Sure.
But there's a bit of a plateau and then a big jump at in 2010. And so I think for this film, we did not have the kind of public cult discourse.
Interesting.
To which to plug this in a way that with Shiny Happy People.
Interesting.
Totally gets labeled a cult documentary.
I hadn't thought about it that way. Yeah, sure.
Right. And so
such that the cult documentary as a media phenomenon had not yet become what it is.
Right. And this was one of the first.
That makes sense.
This was one of the first ones. I mean, Margeau was 76, but I didn't know about that till
and that's about a child
preacher,
televangelist or something.
It's a child preacher who runs out of money in his young adulthood or his late 20s, early 30s, and then he goes back on the revival circuit, but he's no longer believes any of it, and he's just putting on a show.
Okay. We should do a little Marjo Kumare companion pairing or something.
We should. No, they're very similar in a lot of ways.
Anyway,
but so I think
I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point.
And this is one of the first documentaries about evangelicalism, or about this kind of take on evangelicalism, I think.
To be clear, I am thrilled when people do not use cult discourse. I think it's a very problematic discourse. And I think inside of popular media, the way that discourse gets utilized is not great. Is not cool. So it is not that I wished that they had taken that step. It is, though, I think, another chance to reflect on how those things work.
The success of the documentary didn't spawn a bunch of other similar stuff, which I think is also
Academy Award nomination. Tell me your thoughts on that, because I do have a little subset of, so, my common refrain of well, when do people use the word cult? When do they not? But there's a subset of that we can get into, maybe about the specificity of religious organizations inside of a bigger umbrella, we were mentioning a little bit ago. But since the Oscars have come up again, why do you think it was nominated for an Oscar? Or you said you had a bunch of thoughts on that.
Well, my thoughts were just that its popularity. I think it was exactly knowing that coming out in 2006 at the tail end of the flailing Bush administration.
I was going to say that there were midterm elections happening at the time, maybe, right?
Right. And you have the popularity of the Iraq War starting to turn. We're now 5 years after 9/11, so we're not, we're never going to forget, but we're starting to forget a little bit.
Sure.
Things are starting to feel expensive and all over the place. So I think that it was this moment where there's so much George W. Bush in this documentary.
Yeah.
I think it just, especially to the types of, and maybe I'm generalizing but I feel the types of people who decide Academy Award nominations, this film just hits right. It to me, what I kept thinking of was Inherit the Wind. The film about the Scopes trial. It had that same feel to it, right? There's an H.L. Mencken character in Inherit the Wind. There's the radio guys at the end of that film who control the sound. And so to me, this was another version of that kind of the emphasis on fundamentalism, which is also what Inherit the Wind about evolution and fundamentalists. and actually the rise of that movement in the 20s in America, like it just felt like something that was very much the kind of thing that appeals to Academy Award types
It
of
offers a
liberals.
tidy explanation and an origin point to a complicated social and political phenomenon that we are still currently
Right.
dealing with. It's
These
like
people
in
just want political power.
2006. Yeah. In 2006, we're just up to our ears inside of the soup of post 9/11, 5 years out. Bush's administration is nearing its end, but is also not over by a long shot. Like it makes sense that would be like I think that narratives like this and documentaries in general, I think one of the reasons that they are appealing is, at least into my brain, that like is on a chronic and probably unhealthy quest for clarity, even when I know it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Is that it offers kind of a tidy story to tell that explains a thing that seems really, complicated.
No,
Anyway,
and I think
that is really complicated.
Yeah, and I think, Margeau, we mentioned that won an Academy Award in 1972.
Oh, no kidding.
And I think it was for similar reasons. You have the beginnings of this movement coming out of the woodwork. It is pre-Carter and pre-Year of the Evangelical, but it's the beginnings of that. So I do think there's something about, when these documentaries come out around this sort of issues of political whatever. And I do think that fundamentalist functions, in some ways, fundamentalism has been replaced by cult in a lot of the ways we talk about these things. We don't really hear people talk about fundamentalists nowadays anymore.
Right.
Even academically. Like there was a fundamentalism project that was supposed to do comparative fundamentalism across religious traditions, and it sort of died out because we stopped using that word.
Is that because fundamentalism, though, because I could understand how fundamentalism could be sort of a problematic term that kind of collapses nuance as well. Is that, and or if cult has taken it over, well, cult is a word that we would never use, one hopes, that you and I would never use inside of our scholarship.
Right.
Because of how laden it is with judgment calls that is not part of our methodology. So does fundamentalism, do you think it kind of falls into the same traps?
Yes. And I think post 9/11 fundamentalism, so fundamentalism, capital F, was a conservative Protestant intellectual movement that started in the 20s and started at Princeton Seminary, and then became, started before the 20s, but then became, after the Scopes trial, recognized as, these yokels who are with the Monkey trial and William Jennings Bryan, et cetera. And, but it then got expanded to be kind of any kind of extreme religious fervor, whatever you want to call it. Like it became this bigger, and in some ways, there's a lot of people who made this argument. What was fundamentalism theologically amongst conservative Christians gets rebranded as evangelicalism by Billy Graham et al. And others in the middle of the 20th century. And then that carries forward, and you still have some people who self-identify as fundamentalism, but evangelicalism was a way to be like, no, Billy Graham wants to speak at Madison Square Garden to the city people, so he's not doing fundamentalism, he's doing this other thing.
I see.
And so I think 9/11 and the idea of like Islamic fundamentalism, I'm doing scare quotes if you're listening, not watching, scare quotes, opens up the door for an idea like this. There's and Hindu nationalism in the 90s. We have all sorts of fundamentalism.
Right.
It's just this, and I think that's given way now to, in some ways, I think for scholars or people on the left, evangelicalism has given way to Christian nationalism as the category that we mean. But
yeah, so then this is that is a segue for me to cite something that we could link in the show notes if you wanted to. Julie Ingersoll's essay, she's a religious studies scholar who just this past November wrote an essay called From Christian Reconstruction to Christian Nationalism in the Journal of Media and Religion. So if anyone is interested in kind of a scholarly take on those
Yeah.
transitions and evolutions that you're talking about, that might be a good source for that. I mean, it is, yeah, and Ingersoll's work is like takes up American evangelicalism in really specific ways. As her data set. It is very not my data set, but I do have, I was interested in how the documentary, didn't go into some of the, like, exactly what these things are reflective of, like the politics as part of something called dominionism, something that like identifies Christianity as a uniquely American, but also a supremely American, like something that should have a sort of theological supremacy inside of the US because of ideas about the nation's origins.
We need like the pop-up video version of
right. The something called New Apostolic Reformation, that involves a 7 mountain mandate that like identifies really specifically, like, here are 7 areas of US culture that Christians really need to infiltrate and influence so that we can keep it's all part of this idea of like a culture war. And if the stakes are war, and they talk about spiritual warfare quite a lot, then, well, like then if the stakes are war, then it makes sense that there would be that kind of intensity. And I think that not going into the specificities that identifies those stakes keeps us thinking like, what's up with these people? Like it, like it keeps it a kind of like, they're just kooky and want to rule everything. And it's like, well, maybe you keep that perspective. I don't know. But like but what they are, it doesn't just, again, as another of my common refrains, like it's never born in a vacuum, and it doesn't just exist, in isolation, having fallen as a pure ideological system from the sky. Like it has, anyway.
What do you make of the war talk? Like, what should, like, because there's the one perspective of like, I don't know, I don't want to say pearl clutching, but there's that kind of like, oh, war, like, oh, that seems to lack, that does not grant the ability for fundamentalists to use metaphors.
Okay.
Like I've seen this even, especially when I've been doing the stuff I've been looking at around like the January 6th attack, where they're like, well, they were singing Onward Christian Soldiers, and so therefore, they were going to be violent no matter what. So I don't know what, I feel like sometimes the spiritual warfare language, it seems to get, I don't know, it seems like it's hard for people to know what to do with sometimes when they view these things. I'm just curious. I don't know.
I mean, there were lots of moments of that when when the kids are at the pro-life rally and they've got like the red tape across their mouths saying life. Rachel, the resident evangelist, talks about how she's not afraid to go into war, that like sacrifices must be made. Like that is something Ted Haggard brings that up at some point, like, let the battle begin.
Right.
There are all sorts of moments where that rhetoric is deployed, and I think it makes perfect sense, I guess. Like I don't know what to make of it, except that it is something that helps explain what otherwise might feel very other and strange and I don't know, to people who are just watching this inside of a kind of vacuum. I guess that's what sometimes is happening in a vacuum, is like the viewership, and then it doesn't get the context of what is literally at stake
Right.
for people who want to see religion and politics, like that do not see, who can say, because I think for a lot of people it might seem like some impossible contradiction. I think it does to the radio host.
Yeah.
Of like, on one hand, there's separation of church and state, and that's what he says makes America special.
Right.
And I think a lot of Christians like Becky Fisher might use the rhetoric of like, well, of course, separation of church and state. And also, we need to pray over this cutout of the president and pray like whatever they said, like something of protection over him, and engage in this kind of spiritual warfare stuff. Like, I think that the warfare makes the politics and bigger cause inextricably linked.
Yeah.
Rather than something where abstract cause, lives over here, and politics is here. Well, like in pick a war movie, where you always will have like commitment to a cause greater than yourself, and you're just taking orders.
Right.
Both of those things have to be, like, war is a place where that works, and you're fighting over a literal, like, eternity in a literal heaven or hell, right? So if those are your stakes and those are your outcomes, I don't know.
Yeah,
that's what I make of it is a very handy heuristic device that that makes sense of things that otherwise might seem confusing.
No, I think that's right, and I think too that the war language, if you think of the world, there's a great Christian Smith, the sociologist, had a book back in the late 90s, American Evangelicalism, Embattled and Thriving. And I think that title just like sums up like what he finds in his interviews, and is that sense of like, we're embattled, we're under attack, we're the underdogs in the story. And while at the same time there's a evangelical president in the White House, like, but that's what happens, right? And so there's this thing of constantly the war language and the spiritual warfare, which can explain anything that happens, right? A tree falls on your house, well, that's spiritual. This is spiritual warfare. Or a president gets elected, this is spiritual warfare. It makes a lot of sense of that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's I had another point, but we should just keep moving on.
I have one thing that I thought that it was really striking to me.
Give me.
To paraphrase Norm Macdonald, evangelicals love doing rituals. There's so many things in here that we would normally call rituals.
Like what? Because I would say everybody loves doing rituals.
Yeah, but we don't think of evangelicals as doing, like, the traditional take is like, Catholics are ritual people, Protestants are belief people.
Okay. Is that the...
Yeah.
Okay. No, keep going.
But like, I don't think we think about like the smashing. There's like that scene where they're smashing cups.
Yeah.
Right? There's all of this, the putting hands on the president, like all of these things they do. Though even the praying beforehand, the prayer walk, which is a very like, and so I think like there's just something about all of these things and stuff. We always I think that there's a kind of a general sense that like evangelicals are, Bible people or belief people or doctrine people.
Well, and also it's back to the if the invisible norm is also the thing that is always under threat or whatever, or perceives itself as being under threat, because aren't rituals things that you do if it's something outside of like normal life.
Maybe,
and in this sense, like everything is God infused and is part of normal life.
This is a very enchanted world ritual, in a certain way. Yeah, this is
none of it's ritual because all of it, like ritual is like a second order term,
right?
That is like offered by someone analyzing it.
Yes.
Rather than
sitting here saying that's a ritual. They're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
No, 100%.
Yeah.
But I guess this gets to my takeaway.
Okay.
So from a sociological perspective, right? So that analytical thing
that we always try to adopt.
Yes. There's actually nothing shocking here
at all.
Right? So you have a group of people held together by a rhetoric of us and them that use rituals for ecstatic social experiences to reinforce their group identity and make claims for political and social power. Like that's a Tuesday. Right?
And for all of us.
Right.
Right? Make no mistake. This is not unique to traditions that we call religious. It is not it is we are all the time, all of us, going about the business of classifying and separating, making these distinctions to make our world make sense.
I appreciate the film, though, because of the way it follows kids and because of the way they focus on the camp moments and the worship service moments. Have you ever seen the Holy Ghost People, the black and white documentary? It's like an hour long. It's on the internet for free. You can find it like Internet Archive, YouTube. But it's from 1967 about snake handling Pentecostals in West Virginia.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But all it does is it interviews a few people beforehand, and then it just films a whole service.
I'm going to, oh my gosh, for better or worse, I'm going to watch that, Mike. And then next time we get together and talk, I'm going to have my thoughts.
Well, I use it in class. I use it in class all the time.
Conversation.
I use it in class all the time because if you want to just give students something with no analysis, and be like, now talk, like, what do you see here? How do you make sense of this? Because it has no, it is attempting as much as possible to just show you what's happening in the small building.
Sure.
And not, it doesn't, it's edited, it's cut, it's shot.
Of course.
But I think like this film, it has such a focus on people, on the bodies of the people, on what they're doing, on the sounds, on the emotional reactions. It's got all these same kind of close-ups that you really are forced to think about not what are these people saying. Like they're the quotes that pop out about Harry Potter or whatever.
Yeah.
But what really is striking is sort of what the people are doing. And I think that I do appreciate that about this film in the way that it was more about, I think, the doing, even though we get hung up on a lot of the stuff that people are saying and the rhetoric and the politics. So I think the film itself does kind of give us that. So that's
interesting. I don't disagree. And I have a lot of questions about what it means to use children in a documentary like this. Or like what.
Yeah.
Anyway,
100%.
or like why, their choice. Yeah. Why these children instead of other. I bet that there are lots of children at that camp who are just like pretty chill and asking where the s'mores are.
Yeah, the kid whose dad lets him watch, what was it, Harry Potter movies.
I don't know.
My mom won't let me, but my dad does.
Like,
that's the kid. But see, that's the kid
and
that
are
you
they
borrow
not
the CDs
as
from.
representative? And anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
what's your takeaway?
I kind of said it already, but like, yeah, when the stakes are literal war, culture war, spiritual war, whatever, like, of course, it's going to be this intense. And so I think, and if we put anything that seems, radical, or fringe inside of its own context, there is always, an explanatory framework. It doesn't mean that then it's like, okay, so this is the real answer about it. That's not what I mean. I guess it's always the encouragement that I have to not think of things in a vacuum.
It's the whole strange, familiar, strange.
Yeah,
move.
Exactly.
We only have like 4 real points. We just keep cycling.
That's called a thesis.
That's right.
We have a thesis. We have a claim. We need to
make like coffee mugs with each one on it.
We take a claim through different data sets to show it in action.
That's
so
right.
I feel like that's. I do have a cult favorite.
What's your cult favorite?
My cult favorite is the brand new, I was going to say hot off the press, except whatever the filmic version of that is. Documentary Pee-wee as Himself.
Okay.
directed and produced by Matt Wolf. He's made other films about youth culture and like outsider artists and such, but don't know if you're a Pee Wee Herman fan. If that was something that you weren't allowed to watch Pee Wee Herman. I have very complex and ambivalent. It was one of those things that was never like I got it. I thought it was interesting, but it was also not, the energy was not for me. Right? Like it was
I thought the energy was definitely for me.
Yeah, the energy was for you, but the content wasn't.
I have no chill.
For me, I always like a weirdo making pop art, but it was too much. But I do have we get to hear Paul Rubens talk about, who recently passed, R.I.P. Paul Rubens. He's talking about his life and his work and the often fraught relationship between the two.
Yeah.
And for someone who very much was his act and was his character for so many years.
Living the gimmick.
And did not even do interviews as Paul Rubens. Like he was just Pee Wee Herman. And so there were consequences for him, to him.
Ooh.
And
I need to watch
you know what it meant. Well, specifically, he talks about like being out and proud for like his coming of age or whatever, but then like strategically and deliberately going back in the closet in order to become Pee Wee Herman.
Right.
And anyway, so it's a really interesting documentary. It also we also get to see some of the fraught relationship between documentary subject and documentary maker, and that's kind of interesting too.
That is interesting.
And who's in charge and what kind of power that give and take is, and you know, I always like a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah,
so,
no, that's wow.
What's your cult favorite? It's on HBO. It's on HBO Max.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch that. So there's a relatively local. She's from Huntsville. Musician Wanda from the Wanda Band. You should go find them on Spotify.
It's called The Wanda Band, or is it just Wanda Band?
On Spotify, it's Wanda Band.
Okay.
And then I've seen her solo lately, and I think she has her own album just under Wanda coming out. Okay. But if you're trying to go find her music, it's probably under Wanda Band. It's great. Really good singer, songwriter kind of stuff. Really smart songs. But I went, my partner and I went to see her she did a birthday show last week.
I saw you there.
Yes.
You bought me a beer.
At Druid City.
I'm still so grateful.
Company. The least I could do. So we went to the show. It was excellent. After the show, going to buy a t-shirt. And so my daughter loves her songs, has a few of her songs on her playlist of stuff she listens to. So my partner was like, hey, could I get a picture with you for our daughter?
And you're super fan.
And Wanda it's like, hey, what's her name? Can I make her a video? And takes my partner's phone and does this like quick video.
You like her because she stole someone's phone.
Yes.
Someone finally
someone
following your
who has the
advice.
gall to steal a phone.
Someone finally
stole my phone, made this video, to my daughter by name, saying how great to keep dancing and all of this. And then we showed it to her the next morning.
Adorable.
So Wanda Band and Wanda are my cult favorite for being excellent, but also just artists who get it, and who are cool.
Making videos for the kids.
I think that's great.
That's sweet.
So if you ever run into me and someone loves this podcast, I'll make a video for your kid.
And he gives you full permission to steal his phone.
Yeah, steal my phone.
Clearly.
So,
okay.
But yeah, so thanks. Thanks for listening to Cult Favorite. Find us. We have our TikTok videos and our YouTube short videos have gotten a lot better lately. So please find us. Cult Favorite Pod on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Special thanks to the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Alabama for production assistance. And we'll see y'all in a couple of weeks.
Let the summer continue.
Let the summer continue.